everyone, welcome to this week's episode of Weather Extra. I'm First Alert Meteorologist Jillian Johnson. The cold Arctic air is long gone and warmer temperatures return this weekend, and the taste of early spring looks to stick around into the new work week as well. Thankfully, the weather was mostly quiet last week, but we did have a round of some much needed rain. That also came with some thunderstorms. We kick off Weather Extra this week by bringing in First Alert Meteorologist Sean Bellafury, who has more on how much rain fell in Central Texas last week. Sean.
The cold front that pushed its way through Central Texas and North Texas Wednesday into Thursday was thankfully sub-severe. We only had one severe thunderstorm warning for a portion of our area. Yeah, there were some gusty winds, but the big story was the rain. 1.8 inches of rain falling in Waco Wednesday and Thursday, almost 4 inches in Gatesville. And as we take a look up into North Texas, 4+ inch rainfall totals we're seeing around the Dallas-Fort Worth area, stretching onto the eastern side of the Metroplex and even into Northeast Texas as well. Now, the reason why all of this rain fell was, of course, because we had days of Pacific moisture streaming in ahead of this upper level low, which was meandering across the west coast early last week. Now, what happened, though, to give us those high totals, it actually was the jet stream in two separate jet streams. Pacific moisture was streaming in advance of that storm system all week long, but since a lot of these storms moved in during the overnight time period, we had Gulf moisture also moving in at the low levels of the atmosphere. The moisture feeding into those storms, giving them, of course, a little bit of some extra oomph, a little bit extra heavy rain. But the problem came with the Pacific jet stream because once we got to the early morning time period on Thursday, storms slowed down for a little bit, running into the Gulf of Mexico jet. The Pacific jet was pretty much parallel with those storms, which caused them to stall out for a little bit of time, bringing us some heavy rain. We also did have one severe thunderstorm warning, which was on the southern side of Milam County. And the reason why it was only a very small section of our area, the warmest temperatures were found only in Milam, Robertson, and Leon County. It was this little bow echo that moved its way across I-35 that briefly had some strong wind gusts as they moved into Thorndale and Rockdale. Winds gusting upwards of about 60 miles per hour. But thankfully, that was the only severe storm because once that crossed through Cameron and Rockdale, that system pretty much collapsed. Reporting in the studio, Sean Bellafury, KWTX News 10.
Another top story from the past week, a 3.8 magnitude earthquake rattled parts of New England Monday morning. People from Boston to Portland, Maine felt it. The U.S. Geological Survey said the quake was centered about 7 miles southeast of York Harbor, Maine, and struck at a depth of about 8 miles. The USGS seismologist says they don't think there's a connection between this quake and the one that was felt in northern New Jersey and the New York City area the previous week. And to take a look at this, the bitterly cold Arctic air mass was trapped across the northeastern part of the country last week, and it created scenes like this on Niagara Falls. This is what the New York side of Niagara Falls looked like this past Tuesday. The extreme cold covered the falls in thick ice and snow. According to Niagara Parks, the falls never fully freeze over. Mist and spray freeze and create the illusion of a frozen waterfall, but water continues to move beneath the ice. And millions of eyes have been on the sky throughout the month of January as 6 planets have been in line in what's known as a planetary parade, and most can be seen with the naked eye. The celestial spectacle also happened last June, but then only 2 planets could be seen without any special equipment. This time you can spot 4 of them just by looking up.
Venus and Saturn over in the western part of the sky, they'll be visible to the eye, and then you should be able to spot Jupiter and Mars further over to the east. Venus and Jupiter typically are the brightest ones.
Stargazers will need binoculars or a telescope to see Neptune and Uranus. The parade of planets will continue in the first few weeks of February, and it's best spotted on a clear and cloudless night. A new report says insurance costs are rising rapidly for many homeowners across the nation. Data released by the Treasury Department earlier this year shows that homeowners' insurance costs increased 9% faster than overall inflation from 2018 to 2022. The spike has been attributed to extreme weather events like hurricanes and fires. According to the report, the 20% of homes and zip codes judged to be at greatest risk for extreme weather paid an average of more than $2,300 a year in premiums. That's 82% higher than the rates paid by homeowners living in areas with the lowest climate risk. The report also found homeowners living in high-risk areas are 80% more likely to have their policies canceled by insurance companies. And a quarter of U.S. homeowners say they are not financially prepared to handle extreme weather events, according to a survey from Bankrate. 7% of those surveyed say they don't have homeowners insurance. Of those that do have insurance, 15% said they would go into debt to cover their deductible if their property was damaged. Only 40% say they've reviewed their home insurance to make sure they're covered for or from extreme weather property damage. And before the fires in Southern California, you could see mile after mile of beautiful houses on wooded landscapes. What you could not see was that many of those homes were uninsured, or rather underinsured. CBS's Mark Strassman reports from outside Los Angeles, sharing a story of one man who lost everything in these devastating fires.
That's the living room, dining room, kitchen.
Virtually everything Robert Covarrubias owned has settled into heaps of ash.
That's a refrigerator.
His family of 6 has lived in Altadena for 10 years. Their American dream had 4 bedrooms, 4 baths, 2,400 square feet.
From 3 miles, you could see the flames coming our way.
LA's Eaton fire swept through their neighborhood.
It's going to be tough for us to make an inventory of everything we lost, right?
Covarrubias, an IT executive, hopes Alex Traslavina can help. He's an independent insurance adjuster fire victims hire to negotiate with insurance companies. We listened as Traslavina delivered bad news.
You're underinsured when it comes to the policy, and there's clearly not going to be enough to make you whole again.
That's true even though Covarrubias' homeowner's policy covers more than $1 million in losses.
Based off your numbers, it's anywhere between $500 to $1 million short.
He's staring at a second disaster, a financial one.
What are you going to do?
I don't know yet.
It's devastating. It hurts.
Traslavina drove us through scarred and scared Altadena neighborhoods. Scared, wondering how they'll ever afford to rebuild.
The cost to rebuild, the materials outpacing the policies.
So the idea that people are going to be made whole in many cases is a pipe dream.
I don't know how families are going to be able to do it.
For some victims, the loss is both total and totally out of pocket. Nationally, 12% of Americans have no home insurance. With premiums soaring, they drop their coverage and roll the dice. And in a disaster like this, lost big.
I don't think most Americans understand that they're underinsured. I think most Americans see insurance as something they have to do.
Jeremy Porter studies property values after natural disasters. Banks and insurance agencies rely on his data. Take Colorado's Marshall Fire in 2021, a roughly $2 billion disaster. An estimated 3/4 of victims discovered they were underinsured.
If your home is completely destroyed, it's very difficult for most insurance policies to cover the complete rebuild of a property. So there's the second layer of kind of re-victimization.
That's where Robert Covarrubias now finds himself. His savings now compete with $1 million in uninsured losses. Are you determined to rebuild?
Yeah.
Here.
Yeah. The property is worth it. The place is worth it.
It's his assurance to his family. His insurance makes that more complicated. For Eye on America, Mark Strassman in Altadena, California.
Just as you saw, Southern California has dealt with devastating wildfires so far this year. And these fires were driven by unfortunate weather conditions, one of them being Santa Ana winds. Up next on Weather Extra, we give you an update on the fires and learn more about the conditions that made fighting these fires nearly impossible. We'll be right back. Since the start of the year, several devastating wildfires erupted across Southern California, hitting the Los Angeles metro area the hardest. More than 57,000 acres have been burned, over 16,000 structures destroyed, and more than 24 people have lost their lives. While it's still too early for an accurate number of the total financial loss, the losses so far make these wildfires the costliest ever in our nation's history. And you may be wondering how these fires were able to grow and spread so quickly. Well, one of the key ingredients was a feature known as Santa Ana winds. And in this week's Degrees of Science, Brady Taylor spoke with the meteorologist from the National Weather Service's office in San Diego about what Santa Ana winds are and how these winds made these fires nearly impossible to fight. Here's a listen into their conversation.
First thing for people that don't know, what exactly are Santa Ana winds? So they are unique weather phenomena that occurs in Southern California. Basically what happens is you have cold air over part of the country like Colorado and Utah, and that creates a high pressure, so it's dense and heavy. And then that creates an imbalance between high pressure and low pressure, and then the winds blow from high to low, trying to, balance things out. But the problem with Southern California when that happens is we have mountains that go up to 11,000 feet. So the wind can't go through the mountains. It has to go around, in between them, sometimes up and over. And it's kind of like a garden hose. When you put your thumb on it, it makes it stronger and enhances it. And so it magnifies the wind. So instead of having a 30-mile-per-hour wind, you might have a 60-mile-per-hour wind. So it's a wind that's blowing from the desert to the ocean.
For the days that we've had these bad fires, how bad did the Santa Ana winds conditions get during that time frame?
Yeah, over the past 2 weeks and this month alone, we've had 7 different Santa Ana wind events. The biggest one was January 7th and 8th, where we saw wind gusts in the San Gabriel Mountains of Southern California, the San Bernardino Mountains, of 100 miles per hour. But even recently, with the Santa Ana winds in San Diego, we had a wind gust of 102 miles per hour, right in the San Diego Mountains. Now, fortunately, most of the fires were not sitting or developing, burning in 100-mile-per-hour winds. But if you take that 100-mile-per-hour wind and then you roll it down the mountains, okay, it's still blowing 50, 60 miles per hour. And a lot of our fires that erupted felt that type of wind. And at the same time, because it's air coming from the desert, it's very dry. We saw humidity of 2 or 3% while the wind was blowing.
One big thing that people were talking about right when these fires really got bad was there was really no way to fight them because the Santa Ana winds were so strong. How challenging is this for fire departments to try to battle against these winds in this environment?
Yeah, it's very challenging because what ends up presenting itself when you do actually have winds, over 50 miles per hour, anywhere near the fire. It doesn't have to be right on the fire, it could be anywhere near it, because the fire extends up into the atmosphere. So normally the winds are much stronger as you go up, and it carries embers away, it carries the smoke away. But then that also affects the aircraft, the helicopters, the airplanes that are trying to set a perimeter, lay down retardant, drop water directly onto it. So it becomes really challenging and dangerous for them. But when the aircraft are told it's unsafe, it really reduces the efforts, because a lot of these fires are burning in steep terrain, hilly area, hard to get to.
For you as a forecaster, how challenging is it to try to pinpoint where these winds will be really bad and how bad the humidity rates will be and all those impacts?
Yeah, sometimes it's quite challenging because every Santa Ana comes at us at a different angle. It's kind of like calling the strike zone in baseball. And because the mountains don't change, but the direction of the wind changes, we see dramatic results in stronger winds or lighter winds. Some areas have very light wind in a certain Santa Ana because they're protected or blocked by the mountains. But then what happens is someone else is seeing even stronger winds than they normally see. We spend a lot of time focusing on, where is the worst wind going to be, where that matches up with the lowest humidity, and if there is a fire start in that area, what's the fire behavior going to be?
Is there a certain season or time of the year that these are more frequent to happen?
So a lot of us might think of Southern California as Santa Anas are most frequent in October. And the reason why we think that is some of our largest fires have been in September, October. But that's just the start of the Santa Ana season. That's just the start of all the cold air going across the Rockies, the Great Basin. So we actually see the beginning of Santa Anas in early October, and we see the peak in December, January, like right now. So Santa Anas have a season basically from October all the way through March.
Is this, the Santa Ana winds, is this something we're seeing happening more, or is it just where the impacts are felt more with more homes that are in more vulnerable areas and then the dry conditions?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think in this particular scenario for January, like I said, 7 is more than usual, but we should be seeing 4 or 5 Santa Anas during the month of January, but the ground should be wet. We should have greener grass. We should have wet soil. In a 2-month period, we have gone from no drought to now we're listed as extreme drought. So I think in this case, we're seeing it all at once. And then, yes, it becomes very complicated when all those weather ingredients, all those weather extremes come into play, and you get a fire that erupts in an urban wildland interface. In places where there's homes, but yet there's a lot of vegetation to burn. And with those whipping winds of 50 to 70 miles per hour, it's sometimes nearly impossible to contain that.
To hear more about Santa Ana winds and this week's Degrees of Science, scan the QR code on your screen to watch on YouTube or head over to our website at KWTX.com/Degrees of Science. Weather Extra returns after this. Welcome back to Weather Extra. Hundreds of dinosaur footprints have been discovered in England. The accidental discovery happened in a limestone quarry last summer, but has just been revealed. Lee Canary has more from London.
The discovery was a walk in the park, a Jurassic Park, where two dinosaurs crossed paths. Their footprints, about 200 of them, go on for nearly 500 feet. Thought to be stumped by a long-necked sauropod, a Cetiosaurus, and a smaller meat-eating Megalosaurus. Discovered over 160 million years later by a digger in a limestone quarry in rural England. Emma Nichols was there.
They were using their digger to uncover more of the trackways. And so I remember just standing there realizing that I alone in this moment was the very first human being who had ever seen those dinosaur footprints. And that was incredible.
After the tracks were discovered in June, more than 100 scientists, students, and volunteers took part in an excavation that will feature in a British TV series called Digging for Britain. But the value of this find is not just entertaining.
It's a snapshot in the life of the animal. You can learn things about how that animal moved. You can learn how fast it was moving. You can learn exactly what the environment that it was living in was like.
It's part science, part imagination, preserved against all odds. Lee Canary, CBS News, London.
The future fate of the trackways has not yet been decided, but the scientists are working with the operators of the quarry and England's preservation body on options for preserving the site for the future. Now, would you like to see dinosaur footprints up close and personal? Well, if you do, you're in luck, because about an hour and a half away from Central Texas is Dinosaur Valley's State Park, located in Glen Rose, where long ago dinosaurs left footprints in the mud at the edge of an ancient ocean. Our very own Brady Taylor had the chance to speak with Jeff Davis, who is the park superintendent of Dinosaur Valley State Park. In their conversation, they talk about the park and these incredible 100-million-year-old tracks. If you'd like to hear more about this park and how these tracks are still here after all these years, scan the QR code right there on your screen, and that will take you directly to Brady and Jeff's conversation on our YouTube page. Well, it's that time of the year, stomach bug season, and up ahead on Weather Extra, we hear from a leading infectious disease expert on what's going around right now and ways to prevent yourself from catching the stomach bug this winter season. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Weather Extra. Unfortunately, it's a stomach bug season, and the CDC is reporting higher than normal norovirus cases this winter. In this episode of Weather Extra this week, we have another Degrees of Science episode for you. And in this episode, Brady had the opportunity to speak with the leading infectious disease expert about what you can do to protect yourself from getting this virus and what's the best treatment if you do in fact come down with a stomach bug.
Norovirus is known colloquially as winter vomiting disease. Terrible name, but that describes it very well. It usually begins suddenly with explosive vomiting, which then continues and then becomes also abdominal pain, and you also get associated diarrhea and feeling absolutely punk for 2 or 3 days, and then you generally recover. The most important thing, of course, is to keep up your fluids. You don't want to get dehydrated. So keep taking small amounts, but steadily, of clear liquids. Those sports drinks help. Don't take too much at once because it'll come right up, but try to keep up with your fluids, and that'll help you get through these miserable couple of days.
This is something we see a lot in the wintertime months. Is there a particular reason that it's this time of year that we see it a lot?
Well, we get closer together, don't we? And this is so highly communicable from person to person that makes it easy for the virus to go from one individual to another. Also, this virus can persist on surfaces. So you can pick up a small amount on your fingertips, touch your mouth, and induce an infection.
Is there a particular age group or population that we're more worried about that this could become more serious for?
Yeah, it's those very young people and older persons who are more subject to dehydration. So we have to watch them, and occasionally they have to be brought into the hospital to get rehydrated with IV fluids. And the fortunately few deaths that occur because of this virus are usually in those populations where dehydration is not dealt with promptly.
All right, so I know good hand hygiene is a good way to try to help this. Are there any other preventative things folks can do to try to keep from getting the norovirus?
Well, about hand hygiene, those hand hygiene gels that we use, they don't work as well against norovirus. So this is a circumstance where we do it the old-fashioned way. Soap and water works best to prevent noro.
Well, that's all we have for you on this week's episode of Weather Extra. Tune in again next weekend for another half hour of your top weather and science stories. Have a great week, and we'll see you again next time.